What do Americans living abroad really think about the US? My friends that work at an international accounting firm specifically for US citizens abroad polled more than 4,000 people last year living in 125 countries about what their opinion was on four key topics: US taxes, voting, the coronavirus pandemic, and giving up their US citizenship. What were the results? Let's discuss. Before we get started, I should probably give a quick disclaimer that this was not a scientific survey and no one actually knows how many US citizens are living abroad. I know that sounds crazy. The reason for this is that, contrary to popular belief, the US government does not track how many citizens are living or traveling in different countries. There's no sort of exit visa when you leave the United States, and it's voluntary if you want to register with your embassy in a different country. Also, there is no generally accepted definition for what an expat is, and expats aren't included in the US Census. So for the purposes of this video, an expat is just someone who is temporarily living or working outside of his or her home country. And there are an estimated 1 to 9 million US expats living abroad. So the first thing that expats reported back about is that they don't like filing taxes abroad. And why would they? The US is one of only 2 countries in the world that taxes its citizens based on their citizenship, not where they're living. So that means that no matter how long you live outside of the United States, as long as you maintain your citizenship, you are required to file an annual tax return. So expats really don't like this. And this is understandable because if you lived outside of your home country for 10 years or 20 years, you probably wouldn't want to pay taxes there. So according to this survey, 70% of US expats don't feel that they should be required to file US taxes while living abroad. Who are these other 30%? And more than 50% said they would like to repeal citizenship-based taxation. So what would it look like if we didn't have that? Depending on the country you're from, you could actually change your tax domicile to another country with lower or even zero taxes. So if you moved from Norway to Costa Rica or Panama, for example, and you work online, you might not be liable to pay income taxes at all. Unfortunately, I don't think that we will ever see the end of citizenship-based taxation in the US for reasons that relate to the next 3 points that we're going to talk about. The second question was related to the US government's handling of the coronavirus. And here, 81% of expats said that they disapproved of how the US handled the pandemic. 91% opted to stay abroad, and they actually felt safer in their adopted country, and they felt that that country had a better healthcare system. Now, this is a pretty controversial topic, and we're still technically in the pandemic, so I think we're going to need a bit more distance before history can judge which countries handled the coronavirus bad or well. But suffice to say, the US did not do the best job. As of the time of recording this video, the US still has the highest coronavirus case count in the world, the highest number of deaths in the world, and we are 4th in the world for the death rate per 100,000 people. Also, 63% said that the US government's handling of the coronavirus actually inspired them to stay abroad longer. And then about a third had civil unrest and safety concerns, which also proved to be validated. I mean, we had a lot of protests this year, a lot of uncertainty, riots, and insurrection. I mean, that's pretty much the definition of civil unrest. And so I found that really interesting that such an overwhelming amount of Americans abroad would choose to stay abroad at the beginning of a pandemic that saw many, many people crowded into airports trying to get home. And then the third finding was that 1 in 4 expats are considering renouncing their US citizenship. I often get questions about that. If you leave the US, if you have to give up your citizenship, and that's not the case. You can live on a tourist visa, or you can acquire permanent residency, or even a second citizenship, another passport in another country, while keeping your US citizenship. There isn't really a big incentive to give up your US citizenship, but more people in recent years have decided to give it up, specifically because of taxes. So it jumped from about 2,000 people in 2019 to 6,000 in 2020. But that is still just a small drop in the bucket when you think about the total population. A few thousand people giving up their citizenship isn't really going to have much of a tangible impact on US policy. But then also 89% of the respondents said that it was because they felt like their needs weren't being addressed by US politicians. And so this is related to the last point on voting, but when US citizens move abroad, they have a lot less political influence, and it's true. Local domestic policymakers don't care as much about Americans living abroad as they do about their local constituents. So unless a lot of high net worth individuals start doing it, it's going to take a massive critical mass of people giving up their citizenship, which is quite an extreme measure to take for any US politicians to pay any attention. So if you're interested in potentially renouncing your US citizenship and you're curious about the pros and cons of doing that, let me know in the comments below and maybe we can make another video about that. And then the fourth finding was that record numbers of Americans abroad were planning to vote in the 2020 election and did vote. And this is really significant because Americans abroad are notorious for not voting. They actually have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any other US state. This is a really important topic that the mainstream media never covers. And most people don't know that Democrats abroad are known as being the bluest state in the US. They are so liberal, in fact, that expats voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary in both 2016 and 2020. And it's actually quite different for Republicans because Republicans abroad don't have any official representation. So Democrats abroad are recognized by the DNC, but Republicans overseas are not. Now, this is a really loaded topic that I can do an entire video on if you're interested, but I did do a podcast about why expats don't vote and actually why so many of them vote Democratic. I think that the influence of expats has been drastically underrated in the past. And when you consider how many more millions of people are working remotely now and how many people might be living outside of the US in the years to come, or changing states for that matter, the number of expats living abroad could have a very significant impact on the outcome of the US election. And this is really weird because US politicians don't care about expats abroad. So we could end up having this really big group of people that have very little political influence, but end up deciding the outcome of the presidential election. So if we bring this back to the question of repealing citizenship-based taxation, it's very unlikely that that is going to happen when the people who want that repealed are living abroad, they're not voting, and they're not making political donations. And we pretty much live in a pay-for-play system these days in the United States. If you like this type of video, though, then you'll probably like one that I did recently about why expats leave Costa Rica, which you can watch here, and this other video about my thoughts on returning to the US after 15 years abroad. Like this video, share it, subscribe, all that good stuff, and see you in the next video. I don't know why that sentence isn't working. Intro, take two. I think we got it.